What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my Week 2 wide receiver start sits. So going through every single Week 2 matchup, talking about every single fantasy-relevant wide receiver, and then listing them as either a start, fringe option, or a sit. So the start's going to be the wide receivers you feel very confident firing up into your lineup. These could be your running back ones, your running back twos. This doesn't necessarily have to be only 24 wide receivers, but just the guys that feel confident, locking into those wide receiver spots. Then the fringe options, more like your wide receiver threes, your flex plays, they're fine. You might not love them in your lineup, but they're definitely playable. And then the sits obviously are going to be players that you would prefer to keep on your bench. They're going to be timestamps for all the matchups if you guys want to bounce around. If you have any fantasy questions, drop them down below. But let's just dive right into the Thursday night matchup here. A fun one between the Bills and the Dolphins. And for the Bills, I have Keon Coleman as a fringe option. He had strong week 1 usage, 90% raw participation. He actually led the team with 5 targets. It's a pretty low volume passing game, only 22 pass attempts from Josh Allen. So I think he's like, a fringe wide receiver 3, back end wide receiver 3 this week. So I definitely think he's playable. At this point, I will just point out, I think Curtis Samuel might be droppable, 30% raw participation. Khalil Shakir kind of like dominating that role that he could have. Mac Hollins, Khalil Shakir, both had decent usage, but not a strong enough raw participation that would make me want to start them. So Keon Coleman fringe play would be sitting the rest of the Bills wide receivers. Then for the Dolphins, no brainer. You fire up Tyreek Hill, you fire up Jalen Waddle as very, very strong starts. Moving over to the Sunday slate, we have the Raiders taking on the Ravens. For the Raiders, not a huge game for Devontae Adams. He's going to continue to command volume. You fire him up as a top 24 wide receiver, sitting Jacoby Myers. It's not going to be a great offense. I think they're probably supporting 2 pass catchers, and I think it's going to be Devontae Adams and Brock Bowers. Then for the Ravens, Zay Flowers had a lot of involvement. A lot of it was kind of like, near the line of scrimmage, screen plays. I do think he can do more than that. But I think he's going to be a nice play as like a wide receiver 2 option, high-end wide receiver 3, probably at worst. And then for the sits, going to be sitting Rashad Bateman. They're a clear wide receiver 2. Like him as a player, just don't think he's shown enough to warrant playing him in your fantasy lineup. We're going to have the Chargers taking on the Panthers. And for the Chargers here, I think we saw a nice debut performance out of Ladd McConkey. He led the team with 7 targets, 5 receptions, 39 receiving yards. Got into the end zone. He had a 76% raw participation, which isn't super ideal, but for week 1, it's fine. Something he can definitely improve on. We know he's going to have the quarterback play with Justin Herbert, so I think we saw good signs from Ladd McConkey here in week 1. So he's going to be a fringe option for me, going to be sitting Joshua Palmer and Quentin Johnston. I do think that if Ladd McConkey emerges here, he's probably going to be the only fantasy relevant pass catcher here for the Chargers. Then for the Panthers, this was rough in week 1. I was someone who was not overly high on Bryce Young, but I thought he'd be good enough to at least support these weapons, specifically Deontay Johnson. Now, maybe this is an overreaction to go from a start last week with Deontay Johnson to a sit this week, just based on one bad game. But it's not just one bad game, right? We had a full sample size of Bryce Young last year. He was bad. I thought heading into week 2, improved offensive line, improved weapons, Dave Canales coming in. I thought we would see some improvement, and we just didn't. I'm not completely giving up on Deontay Johnson rest of season, but at this point, that week 1 performance was so rough from Bryce Young. I'm going to need to see it first before I actually want to throw him into my lineup. So Deontay Johnson's going to be a sit. Not his fault, not his own doing. It's really just Bryce Young and this offense as a whole. Very limiting situation. Tough for Deontay because he's really just been thrown in these bad offenses over the past few years and been asked to overcome it. Hopefully he can. Week 2, I prefer to not find out with him in my lineup. Then also going to be sitting Xavier Legette and Adam Thielen. In the next matchup, we have the Saints taking on the Cowboys. Saints just completely blew out the Panthers. Chris Olave, despite them putting up a bunch of points, really had, kind of a subpar fantasy day. I'm not worried. I think it's overall a good sign that the Saints were able to put up points. Looked like a new offense. They were using a ton of motion. So I think Olave is going to be fine. I'm still starting him. He was drafted as fringe wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 2. I'm not getting scared off of him after 1 week. Sitting Rashid Shaheed, he did have a big play. I think he's a fun player. I just don't know if he's ever going to be consistent enough to be a reliable option in your fantasy lineup. A fun best ball play where you don't actually have to start him week to week. But in weekly fantasy football, season long, probably someone that's going to be a sit more often than not. And then for the Cowboys here, CeeDee Lamb, obviously you fire him up as a high-end wide receiver one. And then I do think the injury to Jake Ferguson, we'll see how long that lasts. Maybe he's back this week, maybe not. But if Jake Ferguson's out, I think Brandon Cooks is a nice fringe play. Fringe wide receiver 3, someone who's going to be the locked-in number 2 target if Jake Ferguson does miss this one here against the Saints. Moving over to the Buccaneers Lions matchup, a fun game here. For the Bucs, they came out firing in week 1. Baker with a great performance. Mike Evans balled out. Chris Godwin moving back into the slot, had a big game. He had an underwhelming season last year, but it's good to see him, start to bounce back here. I think Evans and Godwin are both solid plays. I will say Jalen McMillan was like the locked-in wide receiver 3. I think he scored a touchdown, had another one where they just missed him for another touchdown. So maybe he's someone who does become fantasy relevant, but unless it's just like a monster matchup, I think it's tough to consider starting McMillan, when you have Evans and Godwin healthy. On the other side for the Lions, Amon-Ra coming off an uncharacteristically down game. Normally he's just super high floor option, especially in PPR formats, going to command a ton of volume. Just a down game in week 1, not freaking out. High-end wide receiver 1 moving forward. Jameson Williams, though, in my opinion, was the story here from this Lions offense. He didn't really put it together in year 1, didn't really put it together in year 2, but this was a huge breakout game for him. He operated as a full-time wide receiver. He was their wide receiver 2, 94% route participation. He was targeted 8 times, went 5 for 121 and a touchdown, also added 13 yards on the ground. I think he's interesting because this was obviously a super great sign in week 1. The question, though, is can he put this together over multiple games? Is he going to be someone who has like a few of these games over a 17-game season, or can he consistently be a reliable fantasy option? I think we have to wait and see, but I'm not super scared of this Bucs secondary. They have some injuries on this defense. I think he's a fringe option as like a wide receiver 3 play, and if he goes out, has another big game, he's definitely someone that I'd consider moving into like the start category heading into week 3. In the next game, we have the Colts taking on the Packers. And for the Colts here, I have Michael Pittman as a fringe option. I've been on record as saying I'm kind of low on Pittman heading into this year. And I feel like some of my concerns definitely kind of came to light. They were there in week 1 for Michael Pittman. He did lead the team with 7 targets, but it turned into 4 receptions and 31 yards. I just don't think his skill set and role line up with Anthony Richardson's skill set, kind of his strengths, his weaknesses. Richardson is fairly inconsistent. He's not the most accurate guy, but he just can make some insane plays. That touchdown pass to Alec Pierce, one of the most insane throws I've ever seen in my life. But I feel like when you look at Pittman's skill set and what his role is, I think he's hurt by Richardson's inconsistency, right? He's the layup guy, the volume option. If Richardson isn't consistently hitting him, that's going to hurt Pittman. But Pittman's not the dude burning down the field. He's not Alec Pierce. He's not A.D. Mitchell. So he's not really the beneficiary of any of those insane plays, whereas Pierce and Mitchell can kind of benefit from those. So I think, my concerns are still there. If you drafted him as like a top 20 wide receiver, I'd be a little bit worried, but I still think he's playable. He's a fringe option, like wide receiver 3. And you're going to be sitting Alec Pierce, A.D. Mitchell. I know Pierce had the big game. I don't think it's something you're going to want to rely on week to week. We'll see what Josh Downs' status is here. And then A.D. Mitchell, this could have been a monster game from him. Like Richardson missed him deep at least a couple times. But week 2, definitely not playing him in my lineup. And then for the Packers here, the Jordan Love injury definitely hurts. Fortunately, it seems like he's not going to go on IR, not going to miss an extended period of time. But I'm assuming he's going to be out here in week 2, and we are going to get Malik Willis. Willis has not looked good, in his run as a quarterback so far here in the NFL. So there's really only one Packers wide receiver I'd want to play here, and that is Jayden Reed. In week 1, we did see Dobbs lead these wide receivers in snaps, routes run, and targets. But Jayden Reed's the guy who went out, had a monster game. He went 4 for 138 and a touchdown, a 33-yard touchdown run. I just think he's the guy they can use creatively. They're going to give him the ball in the backfield. He's going to get some carries. He's a big play threat. So if we're not getting great quarterback play and I want to rely on one of these dudes, it would be Jayden Reed as a fringe option. I think when Love's back, You could definitely make the argument Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs are playable. But for this specific week, I'm sitting Watson, I'm sitting Dobbs, and I am sitting Dontavian Wicks. The next matchup is going to be between the Browns and the Jaguars. And for the Browns here, I am pretty down on this offense. Deshaun Watson looked rough in week 1. It's kind of like this weird situation because I'm about as low as I can be on Deshaun Watson and how that's going to impact the weapons. But like one just atrocious game from Deshaun Watson could then just open up like a fantasy gold mine with Jameis Winston coming in and just slinging the ball around to Amari Cooper, maybe David Njoku if he can get healthy. But like with the spot we're in right now with Deshaun Watson, the best I can do for Amari Cooper is a fringe option, super talented player. He actually did kind of potentially drop a touchdown pass in the game in week 1, so that wasn't great. I just cannot be, all in on Deshaun Watson here. I don't think you can fire up Cooper with a ton of confidence just based on the way Deshaun Watson looked, but he's playable, flex option. If you draft him as your wide receiver 2, he's fine to be thrown in there. For the sits, going to be sitting Jerry Jeudy and Elijah Moore. Really the only pass catchers I want here are Cooper and Njoku. So Cooper for the wide receiver position. And then for the Jaguars, my guy Brian Thomas Jr. looks legit after his first NFL game. 4 targets, 4 receptions, 47 yards, and a touchdown. If you guys didn't get to see the angle that Trevor Lawrence threw that touchdown pass to Brian Thomas Jr., it was pretty insane. Like great anticipation, great throw and catch from those two. It was only 24 pass attempts from this Jaguars offense. Some weird, just like low volume passing games from a lot of these offenses. And then even some of the teams with a lot of pass attempts were just also, like low volume in terms of like the yardage. So Brian Thomas Jr., I liked him coming in. Nice week 1. I think he's a nice start here going up against the Browns, even though it is a tough matchup. Maybe I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but the usage was solid. I think he's a good play. The talent's there. I will say for Christian Kirk, he's someone I was pretty low on heading into the season. I was encouraged by his usage, I'll say. It was not a great fantasy game. It was definitely a bust if you did play him. But coming into this game, I was expecting him to be completely locked out of 12 personnel. I thought he'd only be playing in 3 wide receiver sets. But we actually saw Christian Kirk and Brian Thomas Jr. split those 12 personnel snaps. So that is somewhat of a plus for Christian Kirk here. Obviously, he'd be a much more viable option if he was just locked into those 2 wide receiver sets. But he is not at this point. So he's going to be a fringe play. And then I'm going to be sitting Gabe Davis. In the next matchup, we have the 49ers taking on the Vikings. For the 49ers, definitely feel confident firing up Debo and Brandon Ayuk as top 24 options. A lot of mouths to feed, but definitely guys that are going to be playable. Then for the Vikings here, Justin Jefferson, decent game, nothing crazy. I do think this offense looked good enough to be, encouraged about Justin Jefferson moving forward, but he's going to be a start, even if he had a cone thrown in the football. And then Jordan Addison, I'm not sure if he's going to play this week, dealing with, I believe, another ankle injury. Even if he was playing, would definitely be a sit for me going up against the 49ers. We're going to have the Seahawks taking on the Patriots. And for the Seahawks, I was pretty interested in seeing how this wide receiver room looked, the offense as a whole. It just wasn't a great passing game overall. I'm not freaking out, but Tyler Lockett was really like the only relevant pass catcher in this one, and he was playing wide receiver 3 snaps. I'm not freaking out on DK Metcalf. I'm not panicking. He's still going to be a start for me. For JSN and Lockett, I have both of them as sits. I just don't think I can confidently start either of them until we get a clear picture on what the usage is going to be. Like, was Tyler Lockett just 3 wide receiver sets because he was injured, or is JSN going to be, the guy in there on 12 personnel throughout the rest of the season? We just don't know yet. Until we get to see that and see like a big passing game out of this offense, I'd prefer to just play DK Metcalf and then sit the other 2. Then for the Patriots, this was pretty much like a wide receiver committee. They got the win, but there was just no passing volume. Definitely can't feel confident playing any of these dudes. So sitting Douglas, sitting Polk, sitting Tyquan Thornton, and sitting KJ Osborne. Moving over to the Jets-Titans matchup. For the Jets here, I think you fire up Garrett Wilson as a solid start. Throw him into your lineup. You draft him as a wide receiver 1. He's playing for you. Going to be sitting Mike Williams there for the Jets. And then for the Titans, I think in other matchups, Calvin Ridley would be a fringe option for me. Also going to be sitting DeAndre Hopkins. For D-Hop, I'll just throw it out there. I think he played like 9 snaps. He was very, very limited. He'd be a sit even if he was fully healthy, but definitely going to be a sit coming off the usage we saw in week 1. And then for Ridley, like I said, I think in other matchups, he'd be a fringe play. Will Levis looked rough. Like, the dude made some very questionable throws. I'm a Bears fan, so I appreciate it. It was fun to see him pretty much throw the game away, as a Bears fan. But like, Bears are a good defense. Jets secondary is a different animal. I would not be surprised if he was just completely neutralized by this Jets defense. So sitting Ridley, sitting Hopkins. Moving over to one of the grosser games of the week, we have the Giants taking on the Commanders. For the Giants here, Malik Neighbors didn't do anything crazy in his NFL debut, but it was solid, commanded decent volume. Obviously not a great game out of this Giants offense. I think this is a much more favorable matchup here against the Commanders. We saw the Bucs just completely shred them. I could definitely see a huge breakout game for Malik Neighbors here. So he's going to be a start. Wan'Dale Robinson's a sit. I think he commanded something crazy like 12 targets. That seems like an outlier performance. We'll see if he has another big game here, at least in terms of like commanding volume. Maybe I look at him as a fringe option for week 3, but someone I'd prefer to not be playing. And then for the Commanders here, Terry McLaurin's going to be a fringe play. I feel like we are in store for another just frustrating season from Terry McLaurin. It's not even that like Jaden Daniels played bad or anything. They just really weren't having him unload the ball. His 8-out was super low. He's obviously going to get most of his fantasy production in the rushing department. So Terry's going to be a fringe play. He didn't do a ton. I guess we'll hope, they start to open it up a little bit, let Daniels really rip it. But early on, not feeling great about Terry McLaurin going forward. We're going to have the Rams taking on the Cardinals in a divisional matchup. And unfortunately, we just got the news that Puka Nacua is going to be missing at least the next 4 games. He's going on IR. That's a tough break. He re-aggravated the knee injury he had in the preseason. So Cooper Kupp, could be like a high-end wide receiver 1 rest of season. This is almost like the reverse of what we had last year, where like Puka was the beneficiary of the Cooper Kupp injury. Now you have Kupp healthy. Even when Puka comes back, Kupp still might just be smashing. So Kupp, obviously a great start. I'd like to see what this wide receiver split is without Puka for a week before we, play one of these dudes. Demarcus Robinson and Tyler Johnson both had decent games on Sunday Night Football. But I do just want to see it first without Puka, so both those dudes are going to be sits. Then for the Cardinals here, starting Marvin Harrison Jr., I know he kind of dudded week 1. It happens. He's a rookie. There's a lot of players that just kind of flopped. It was just one of those weeks, so I'm not panicking. You drafted him as like a back-end wide receiver 2, or like a back-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2. One bad game should not scare you off of him. He's a start. Still going to be sitting Michael Wilson and Greg Dortch. Then looking at the Steelers-Broncos matchup here, George Pickens just finds a way to produce. It was not a great overall game from the Steelers offense, but Pickens still, gave you the production. Justin Fields, even though he's not going to lead these like insane high ceiling offenses, the dude does find his wide receiver 1. We saw DJ Moore last year with a great season. He found George Pickens in week 1. We'll see what the quarterback situation is heading into week 2. Either way, though, I do think Pickens is, playable as like a decent option this week. And then for the Broncos, Courtland Sutton commanded a lot of volume, didn't have a great overall fantasy day, but I think he's playable as a fringe option. Bo Nix was rough. He should just continue to get better moving forward. So Sutton, I do think playable as like a fringe wide receiver 3. Then probably one of the more highly anticipated games, we have the Bengals taking on the Chiefs. For the Bengals here, Jamar Chase had the contract thing. They have not agreed to a contract yet, but he still played. Also, he was apparently sick with food poisoning. So he had a fine game, nothing crazy, not what you expect out of Jamar Chase, but he didn't kill you. If he's playing, he's a start. T. Higgins is in a weird spot here because he missed week 1 with injury. And if you remember, T. Higgins has been a little like iffy. There's been some, suspect usage when he's been injured heading into games. We saw it, I think it was 2 years ago, where he would go into the game questionable. They would say he was active, and then he would play like 2 snaps, run 1 route, and you would play him in your fantasy lineup, and he would just give you a 0. So if T. Higgins was healthy, he'd be a start for me. But I just don't think we can bank on that. So at best, he's going to be a fringe play for me. Hopefully he can play, and we see him log a full game. Then for the Chiefs here, Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy, locked in starts. I was very, very high on Xavier Worthy this season. I think he is the player I drafted the most of in my redraft leagues. And he went out there, got starting wide receiver snaps, had a 77% route participation, was tied for the most routes run by a wide receiver for the Chiefs. 2 receptions, 47 yards and a touchdown, 21-yard touchdown run. Now, I'm not expecting like just those like breakaway touchdowns every single week. The volume wasn't really there in week 1, but the dude is clearly a big play threat. after what they saw in week one, they're going to have to get the ball in this dude's hands. And I think he's just going to continue to earn more and more opportunities. And then for Rashee Rice, he's also looking like a smash pick. 9 targets, 33% target share, 7 receptions for 103 yards. Both these dudes are looking like great picks, and I think they're going to be absolute monsters this year for fantasy. And then sitting Hollywood Brown, if he does play, I feel like just based on his injury, he's already like coming in as like the odd man out. So maybe he establishes a role, but definitely is not someone I'd be looking to play here in week 2. Then looking at the Bears-Texans matchup, I believe this is Sunday Night Football. Bears wide receiver room is kind of up in the air at this point. I still like DJ Moore as their number 1. It was a rough overall game for Caleb Williams. There's no denying that. As a Bears fan, it was a tough watch, like I mentioned with the Titans. But DJ Moore, I still think he's a start. I think we're going to get a bounce back here. I think Caleb will play better. And then this Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze situation, we had them kind of splitting snaps. Both guys had decent route participations in week 1, but I think a lot of that was due to Keenan Allen being banged up. Now we have Rome Odunze banged up heading into this week. I'll say that if Rome Odunze plays, I'd have Keenan Allen as a fringe option, Rome Odunze as a sit if he's banged up. I do think Keenan Allen still has the edge early on in the season. With Rome Odunze out, I do think Keenan Allen's a much more viable play this week, so I am going to have him fringe option start. It's tough. I guess I'll keep him as a fringe play, but I do think he's a better option than if Rome Odunze was healthy. And then for the Texans here, I have all 3 of their top wide receivers as starts. Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell. All of them were pretty close together in terms of their route participations. All were between 84 and 90%. We saw 8 targets for Nico Collins, Tank Dell, 6 for Stephon Diggs, who we saw get into the end zone twice. I think these guys are like weekly top 24 options. I'm not necessarily banking on like all 3 of them having big games every single week, but if you just go player by player, I think each week, they're lined up to give you solid production. I will say Tank Dell was kind of like the odd man out where Nico Collins had the big yardage game. Stephon Diggs got into the end zone twice. I really like Tank Dell as a buy low. His route participation was better than expected. Like I said, he was tied for the team lead in targets, and he was also used down the field with 105 air yards compared to only 9 air yards for Stephon Diggs. So I think he's interesting, and better games are ahead here for Tank Dell. And then the final game of the week, Monday Night Football, Falcons taking on the Eagles. For the Falcons, I have Drake London as a fringe option. This is just so tough for Drake London because the argument that I've been making for him is like he's proven he's talented. He just needs the quarterback play. Now he finally has the quarterback play from Kirk Cousins, and I don't think he has the quarterback play from Kirk Cousins. I don't know what it is. There's something fishy going on with this quarterback situation where you sign Kirk Cousins, then you draft Michael Penix with the number 8 overall pick. It's just a weird decision, but the more we see with like Kirk Cousins looking really rough in week 1, it seems like he can barely even plant on like the foot where he tore his Achilles or like the leg where he tore his Achilles. And then the fact that Michael Penix like barely played at all in the preseason, and they were talking about how they like seen enough from him. Like you would think if you had this rookie that was going to sit for multiple years, you would want them to get their reps in the preseason. So I really think Kirk Cousins could get replaced at any point. I do think, if he continues to struggle like he did in week 1, that's an issue. And just without the quarterback play, it's tough to fully trust Drake London. So I'm going to have him as a fringe option. Hopefully we see Kirk Cousins come in, ball out, or Michael Penix take over, get the job, and play well. I just want to see Drake London with a good quarterback. So hopefully we get that one way or the other. Then going to be sitting Darnell Mooney. And then for the Eagles, you don't have to complicate things. You fire up A.J. Brown, you fire up Devonta Smith as very, very strong starts. So that's going to wrap it up for every single week 2 matchup. Let me know your thoughts. Any fantasy questions, drop them down below. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.